Hello and welcome to the second edition of Group XP's Experience Index 2017. My name's Tim Greenhalgh, Chief Creative Officer of Group XP. I'm here today with Iain Ellwood, who's our Chief Growth Officer. In the next 20 to 25 minutes, we're going to take you through, as I'm sure you'd expect, the results of this year's index. But we're also going to spend some time, I think, because in the 3 years since Group XP started this, we've been spending a lot of time looking at the dynamics of experiences. And so what we want to do is share with you today some thoughts on that, some themes, if you will, on how experiences are changing and how the dynamics are changing. Because you will see today some surprising new entries to the index, as well as some changes at the top of the index in terms of people who are doing well and people who are doing less well. But I leave this thought with you at the beginning, which is to say we should really think about where experiences come from and how people imagine experiences, because they're made up in many and different ways, and probably not in the ways that we would normally expect. So as I say, we're going to take about 20 and 25 minutes of your time. Just a quick couple of notes at the beginning. If you want to contact us, if you want to send any questions in or contact us after the event, then please contact us on info@group-xp.com. A very personal email address. I promise you there isn't a chatbot waiting at the end. There is an actual real person who will respond to you. Any questions that we don't get to at the end of this session, we will make sure we reply to you. And then the second point is, please, of course, download the report. In the report, there is everything that we'll talk about today, as well as a number of case studies we've done on some of the featured brands that are in this year's index. And that is available at www.group-xp.com. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to Iain, who will take you through the beginning portion of this, where we start to look at the index, how it's been built, and some of the results.
Fantastic, thank you so much, Tim. So before we get into the detail and the results, I'm just going to paint a picture of why we got to this place with the Group XP Index. And we really stood back and thought, all our clients and brands are really interested in this idea of experience, but nobody's really quantified the business value of that. And that was kind of, I guess, the genesis of why we really started to look at this and really think, how can we quantify the value of experience, but also put a kind of dollar value on it, both for the short-term sales gains as well as the long-term shareholder value. Yep. So that's what we really used the data for, to really back up and support that. So that's the Group XP Index. Now let me take you through some of the data and the results. So of course the first thing we do is partner up with our friends at Brand Z again, and they are fantastic and have one of the world's largest consumer surveys every year. They survey over 3 million consumers across 41 different markets. So we've got a very global, robust and rigorous data set to work with, and that really helps us when we start digging into the nuances of the analysis. And just to give you a little bit of background, this is how we build up the index. There are 4 key components: create, deliver, engage, and strive. And those are the kind of what we call the kind of fundamentals, the foundation building blocks. And they really are how we interrogate the Brand Z database. And it was based on a model that Brand Union worked with for over a decade. So we know it's a very strong model. So let's dig into them in more detail. Create something unique in people's minds, deliver on people's most important needs, engage through integrated services and content, and obviously finally strive to make people's future lives better. So you can start to see how when we talk about experience, and Tim mentioned it earlier, this isn't a touchpoint analysis or a UX website analysis. This is an overall analysis of how people, consumers particularly, experience brands and experiences. And of course, what we can do then is, by interrogating the Brand Z database, we can identify the scores for each of those 4 critical components. So here we can see Microsoft scores, we've got individual scores for each of the components, but also we can ladder that up to a global score. So Microsoft scores 114.17. And the way we do that is we build a global average. So we take all 4 scores, add them up and then divide by 4. And there's a reason we do that, rather than treating categories differently or weighting them or adding some kind of bias to the scoring, is we want to make sure that every single brand we assess can be compared against every other brand in the world, whether it's across markets or across categories as well. And the baseline is about 100. So the average for any market or any category is a score of 100. So we can see here that Microsoft is doing fantastically well, particularly Engage and Strive, but also extremely well in Create and Deliver. So that's how we build the index through those scores. Now, I guess the big question, I guess the reason you've tuned in is really to find out who's in our top 30, and I'm going to do it in kind of reverse order just to kind of build some minor suspense. Here's the bottom half of the top 30, but it's interesting already. We can see 6 new entries coming in, new media brands like YouTube, but also brands that are reinventing themselves like Microsoft in at number 21, along with some other classic brands like McDonald's and Coca-Cola. So there's quite a lot of movement in the bottom half of the league table. And if we move and look at the top 15, we can see again Pampers is the number 1 experience brand through all the data analysis we've done. But we can also see, Facebook has risen quite strongly, and quite a few of the brands have moved up as well. So there's not as much movement in the top 15 as the next 15. Of course, let's dwell on Pampers. We showcased it last year in our report. It's not surprising really when we think about it's P&G's biggest global brand. P&G are one of the world's best marketing companies in the world. And I think one of the things they did very successfully a couple of years ago is really reframe what their purpose was from being a kind of white paper products company to really being a company that helps babies and mothers grow. And as soon as you shift and reframe your purpose to thinking about the customer and what's important in their lives, you start to understand that unlocks and unleashes a whole load of innovative experiences and apps and ways to get in touch and ways to learn and grow your brand and experience. So we can really see how Pampers has done that, and I'd really encourage you to go back and look at that report. Obviously Apple is down, and we'll see there's some private battles going on here. So Apple's down 1 position at 7, Samsung is up 5 points at 12. So in the consumer electronics world, there's a battle going on. Equally, Nike is down and Adidas is up. So again, another little private battle going on there. And then finally, looking at the top 30, Tesla obviously still winning against the traditional automotive players of Mercedes and BMW. So even though this is a kind of fairly short list, we can already garner quite a lot of insight about what's happening at a category level as well as a brand level. So that's the kind of movers and shakers. If we look at the scores, again, it paints a slightly different picture as well, because whilst Pampers is still number 1, its score has dropped actually quite significantly since last year, and the top 9 behind it have also grown quite rapidly. So they've closed the gap between the number 1 brand and the rest. And so, Tim and I were talking earlier that we're very interested to see what happens next year as those kind of top 9 brands increase their power and potentially move up the lists, but we'll have to wait and see on that. But certainly the top 10 is closing in terms of its overall scores. We can also look at this top 30 list and break it down by category, and again it generates some quite interesting insights. CPG or FMCG has the largest share of brands in the top 30, which again is interesting, but what's perhaps more interesting is when we look at the next level. So we look at mobility, tech and media entertainment as a category of disrupting brands, make up over 1/3 of the top 30 index. So we can start to see some of the behaviors from those brands and those companies are really starting to pay dividends as they move forward. Perhaps surprisingly, hospitality is down there with only 3%, and certainly there are still no traditional hotel brands in the top 30 list. And again, when we analyse those over the past year, we've identified that whilst they're very good at personal service, the human touch on property, they've yet to really deliver on the digital tech, data, machine learning half of the challenge of experience. So quite a lot of interesting, again, pictures emerging from the category breakdown. Of course, the global list is a very large, big brands. If we dig into the markets themselves, we can cut the data by market as well as by category. This is the US market. Interestingly, Amazon is still number 1 compared with last year, although Fidelity has shot up the list to number 2. And I think if we step back and look at the top 15, we can really see that they're dominated by service brands, which again is quite interesting in itself for the US. If we move on to the UK now, actually this list has the least movement in the top 3. Pampers, Amazon and PayPal are in exactly the same position as they were last year. But again, some of the more disruptive brands, Dyson at number 8, have come in. And what's interesting about them is, of course, great premium vacuum cleaners, but they've also just announced they're going to get into driverless cars and use that battery and motor technology that they're so expert at to challenge another marketplace. So I guess we'll expect to see more from them in the future as well. If we move on to kind of the Chinese market, again, perhaps the most movement compared with last year, perhaps because, that market's got a lot of very dynamic players in it. And what's interesting, WeChat and Baidu right up there at number 1 and number 3, very strong, core brand, service and experience brands in the Chinese market. Apple has dropped down to number 2. And I guess interestingly now, there are only very few what we might call traditional Western brands in the Chinese market analysis alone compared with last year. And of course, I guess the most important thing, of course, is, that's great analysis and we understand how they have created those experiences. But really proving the case that, great experiences make money was the reason we set up the index in the first place. And these are kind of 3 core, I guess, numbers to keep in mind. The first one is when we score brands with a high experience, they're 26% more likely to drive consumer demand. That's quite significant in itself. Their brand value for those high experience brands has increased by over 166% in the last 10 years. And of course, perhaps what CEOs and shareholders care most about, their shareholder value has increased by over 200% in the last 3 years alone. So let's take a look at that because I think that's a particularly important point. So this is the last 3 years stock market performance of 2 classic market indices, the MSCI index and the S&P 500. And they've done pretty well actually over the last 3 years. They've grown by 50%. But if we look at our portfolio of top 30 global experience brands, they've outperformed that market average by more than double. And that's a tremendous performance, even over what's been quite a turbulent few years in geopolitical terms. So, fantastic result. And if we compare that with last year, we can see, last year's portfolio performed very well, 73.3%, but this year's portfolio of 30 brands has done even better than that, which really confirms to us that investing in experiences really drives great results and returns.
So thanks, Ian. As I said at the beginning, one of the things we want to do is we thought it'd be useful, as I said, in the 3 years we've been doing this, would be to both take the data and then also start to understand the emotion around experience. And so what we've done through a series of audits in the last 12 months is we've actually taken a much deeper dive into some of the brands that feature on the index. And in doing that, what started to emerge were a series of themes that started to become quite interesting in terms of how brands are behaving and the experiences that they're offering. And we've actually termed it kind of a series of archetypes. So if I can, I will just take you through those archetypes now, because I think they offer up some very interesting ideas about how one can start to build brands in the future around the way in which it panders and looks after and takes care of consumers' desires and demands. So the 6 archetypes are here. They are the campfire, a highway, a playground, a lighthouse, a gym experience or brand, or a lab experience or brand. We've termed those in those ways because of the way in which we, again, started to look at the way in which the brands were behaving. But it was also informed by the data. If you remember, Ian talked about brands that create something unique, deliver on important needs, engage in strong integrated online ways, and strive for a better future. What we found was that all the brands in the top 30 performed incredibly well. But actually what they did was they played to their strengths. Often we found with these brands that there were 2 of the actual data points that were much higher than the others. And if you look at this, there are really only 6 opportunities or 6 options here, where it may be that a campfire brand is stronger in engaging and striving, whereas a gym brand is much stronger in terms of delivering to people's needs, but also helping them strive for a better future. So we've unpacked this a bit more. If you take campfire as a concept, then Facebook seems to be one of the best brands at the moment on our index. Number 2, an average of 139, which is very high. A campfire brand is typified by being a place, either physical or virtual, where people can connect. And when you take a look at Facebook, they and all the brands they own are very engaging and they're very sociable. It's a very worldly, liberal and optimistic view of the future. And it is all about encouraging collaboration. We see those as some of the key tenets of a campfire experience and a campfire brand. If If you move on to highway, we see Coca-Cola as being exemplary in terms of consistent, convenient, and a seamless experience. They've been doing a lot with their brand over previous years. They're number 20 at 114. And again, when you look at Coke, they're offering you more than you would expect. You assume it is just a bottle in a fridge in a convenience store. But actually they're starting to look at other ways in which they can bring their brand to life, bring the refreshing nature, but also the engagement of their brand to life, but in an easy, clean and simple way. And so they are actually looking at ways in which they can enable and support people's lives to create, as I said at the beginning, a consistent, convenient and seamless experience. A great example of a playground experience and brand would be Adidas, number 18 in the chart, 115.77. They're all about stimulation and an enjoyable sense of discovery. When you look at what Adidas have been doing in the last few years, they've been really reading culture. They've been creating localized pop-ups. The whole My Adidas initiative, where I can co-create and have a live dialogue with the Adidas brand, is a real breakthrough for them, which has moved away from simply just providing sports apparel to being much more intuitive and human, but in a playground way, being vivid, being entertaining, being incredibly informative around my passions when it comes to exercise and sport. And I think in this respect, the imagination and the immersiveness of the Adidas experience is one that has seen them doing incredibly well on the index. A lighthouse brand, somebody who is an expert guiding light, really has to be typified again by a brand like Tesla. We're seeing incredible things that Elon Musk and his various organizations are doing. They're really showing a better way, a way in which sustainability, in which electric vehicles, and even things like Hyperloop are all contributing to people's perception of the Tesla experience. They're supporting and educating people who are finding this a very new world for them to deal with. Buying an electric car is not simple. So when you go to one of their, and we've written an entire case study on this in the report that we don't mention at the beginning, but I think it's their unique vantage point that they've taken gives them the opportunity to be a real expert and a real guiding light in this area of the world. A gym brand is one that is about continuous improvement, pretty much like a gym. And we see this one being somebody like Colgate. Colgate in many ways demonstrates, like a good CPG or FMCG brand, everything about delivering what consumers need, but striving to help people have a better future. Colgate has, again, been doing a lot of work, whether it be their interactions via apps, etc., etc. But they've also started to look at things like bright smiles and bright futures. This is where people are given free dental screening, but also oral care education across the world. This has reached 800 million people in 80 countries across the world. They've created water ambassadors because they are determined to encourage people not to leave the tap running when they're brushing their teeth, which is a great initiative. They have a hashtag, every drop counts. They have a brutal use of their brand. So when you go into a store, you are going to find the Colgate brand very quickly and very easily. And we should understand that Colgate as a brand is bought by over half the world's households. So this is a significant global brand that is doing things with its experience. They're connecting the dots. It's about attention to detail, and it's about being integrated and systematic in the way that they go about it. And then the final archetype is the lab archetype, a very dynamic archetype here, and this is Google. It's other brands as well, but this is Google in our view. This is about constantly redefining new worlds. Google are challenging conventions at every step. It's a very fluid, a very personalized experience. And again, the brands it owns, whether it be things like Google Assistant, which is a pleasure to use, it's all about a live experience as well. So I am actually seeing and working with, and in many ways contributing to, the groundbreaking experiences that they are developing for us. So I think that gives us a good sense of how we've tried to take a look at the world of experience and add a few more data points onto that in terms of the archetypes.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Tim. And I guess it's exactly that conundrum that we found through, all our research, all the analysis of all the 6 archetypes, as well as the detailed analysis in the report, is this balance between the rigorous data and the tech as well as the humanizing and emotional component of all of these brands. And that leads us to, I guess, our central theme or our central insight from all of the case studies that we've done that you can see in the report, download later, is around this tech-human paradox. We really think this is the most important thing that we see our brands trying to deliver on, because of course the rush to automation is such an imperative, but we have to make sure we keep the emotional aspect as well. Otherwise we lose that kind of humanity. And I guess really the question is, of course, robots can do a great job, and make sure that the machine learning really delivers on my preferences when I go to that instant chat messenger, or I don't know if you've looked at the North Face jacket chooser site. Is fantastic. It knows what the weather's going to be like in Chicago in November, so it really helps you pick a jacket out. It can combine data in ways that people just simply couldn't do, and do it in real time. So there's no question that AI can do a fantastic job. I think more the question is, do we care and do we want to have relationships with robots as well? So, Alan Turing's old question, can you tell whether it's a robot on the other end of the line, is perhaps redundant. It's more about, do I want to spend my time with them as much as do I know it's a robot?
So that's one of the things that's obviously been driving our thinking. And again, when you look at the index is made up of many brands who are beautifully balancing the tech side, the data side of their business, but they're also balancing it with real human insight and also human interaction. We often talk about the fact that algorithms are wonderful. They can help you get to the answers you need very quickly, but we also need the aprons. So it's the aprons and algorithms, because we love somebody who will serve us a great cup of coffee. And I think one of the things we're seeing in the top 30, as I said before, are brands that are finding that balance. Daniel Kahneman talks about the idea of, as humans, we are led with the emotions first. So I think that one of the things we are keen to start exploring further is this idea that experience need to be made up of both the emotion and the function, so that they are truly delivering onto all the things that I need, but also delivering in an emotional way for me as well. Because I think this is one of the challenges we think that many of the CEOs are facing these days. So that kind of wraps it up. But one of the things I just need to do is let me tell you quickly again about some of the contact details. If you need to contact us about this, then again, please info@group-xp.com. If you want, please download the full report. I think we should also say that we are available, both as myself and Iain, but also the Group XP network, to work with you, to talk to you about this, to also let you see some of the audits that we've been doing, and also some of the more detailed work we're doing around specific categories and what are the dynamics of experience within those. But you will see in the report all the things we talked about today, as well as 3 case studies of some of the brands that we have really looked at over the last 6 months. So thank you for your time. But before we close, we've got some questions that have already come in. And I think Iain's got them on his phone, once he's put his number in.
If you can get into his phone. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Tim. So indeed, we have got a few questions. I'll try and just scroll through and find some choice ones to test you on, if that's all right. So I guess the first one here is from Elisa in North America, by the looks of it, is on the archetypes, and they're fascinating and rich and very vivid. Is a gym brand always a gym brand? She's asking.
So one of the things we said before was that all these brands that we featured today have all scored very highly, which makes them a great experience brand. But the gym brands are the ones that have scored higher, like Colgate. Now, the question is, there'll be times when it would be useful for Colgate to use more of a playground experience. So the key is that brands should play to their strengths and understand that they're a gym brand, right. But there is no reason why at times an interaction or a way in which they behave can't have more of a playground feel to it. So I don't think brands should be hemmed in, but I think the crucial thing is for them to realize what are the strengths that they're playing to.
Right. And I think that's really interesting, is that when we've done the initial analysis, we can see which brands are gym brands or playground brands or lab brands, and that's the starting point. That's not the destination where you want to get to with your strategy, but at least it gives you a baseline of, are you the same in North America as you are in Europe? Have you got a consistent kind of platform across the world? And I think that's where the power comes from.
Yep.
Fantastic, thank you for that. I'll just get back into my phone. So another question, which I think when we look at the list here, this is Cecilia from London. She's asking, are we starting to see the scores from the new generation brands, the Airbnbs of this world?
So this is a question we're asked a lot, because you will assume that there are quite a few brands that you know and love that have become rather new to you, that are not on the index. The reason for that is keep watching. We have to have, I think, for this to have any kind of sense of robustness, we have to have at least 3 years worth of data. So a brand like Airbnb will not feature this year, but there's a very good chance it will feature next year. And I think that's what's the most interesting thing about the index at the moment, is that the new entrants are the ones that are coming through and have probably not been around for very long. It's good to see brands that have been around for a long time who are doing well and are changing their perspective, like a Pampers or a Colgate. But I think next year, in the next 2 years, I think we're going to see a lot more brands that we would initially have suspected to have been on the list to appear on the list. But as I say, we need 3 years worth of data for them to qualify to go on the list at this stage.
Fantastic. I'm so glad the creative director said that and not me. But
Yeah,
there we go.
I'm all about data.
So another question here, which again is interesting, is why are there no Asian brands on the global top 30 list? And
You can answer that
I'll take that one. Clearly, one of the reasons we build the global list is to make sure they have truly global presence, that they are truly available to consumers around the world. And whilst the Chinese market in itself is a big enough market for many brands like WeChat or Baidu or Alibaba, they don't spread their presence across the world enough yet, I would emphasize the yet there, to be classed as truly global brands, even though they are fantastic powerhouses in their own right. And we ran a series of these sessions in Shanghai, Hong Kong and Singapore earlier in the year to really focus on those specific markets, because they have very specific characteristics and we want to make sure we capture them. But there is a specific reason why they're not in the global list, again, yet.
So I think that's it. Thanks for joining us. I hope that was informative. And if we don't see you before, we'll see you next year when we reveal 2018 results.
Fantastic.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.